The global elite's Great Reset agenda revealed. And I know this sounds like tinfoil hat stuff, but I can promise you it isn't. It's straight from the World Economic Forum's website. We're going to dive right in. I'm going to explain this whole thing to you, why it won't work from an economic standpoint, and what the most likely end game is for you and me, the average Joe and Jane. I'm going to explain this to you in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's go over an overview of this Great Reset. And to start, we're going to look at a clip of these individuals who are in charge, these global elites that think that we need a top-down solution to all the world's problems. And forewarned, this is extremely bizarre to say the least. And I would dare you, I would challenge each and every one of you watching this video right now to watch this clip and not think this is straight from a James Bond movie. We're basically looking at Spectre in real life. Editor, let's go to the clip.
To get us underway, let's hear from the forum's executive chairman and founder, Professor Klaus Schwab.
Thank you, Adrian. It is obvious that we are in the midst of the most severe crisis the world has experienced since World War II. 75 years ago, countries and people came together to shape the post-war global order, which brought us decades of peace, increased global cooperation, and prosperity to hundreds of millions of people around the world. The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century. It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality. Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system for the need for the post-corona era. In short, we need a great reset.
Now is the time to think what history would say about this crisis. And now is the time for all of us to define our own role. What is it that would make it so that history would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset?
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world. Rebalancing investment, harnessing science and technology, and advancing the transition to net zero emissions, all elements of the Great Reset, are fundamental to building the future we need.
And I'll give you a moment to shake off the creepiness of these people at the World Economic Forum. It's headed up by a guy named Klaus Schwab. That's who you saw right at the beginning. And I've got him drawn here to perfection, of course. And he is with his cat. We'll go ahead and call him Mr. Bigglesworth. For obvious reasons. But I don't know if he's head of the World Economic Forum or what I'm calling the BDC. Bizarre, disturbing, and creepy. More on that later. I'll get off that topic. Let's get into the meat of the video and the actual economics. So what is this Great Reset? Well, let's go to a recent post from Klaus himself outlining, ironically, his 3 steps to this Great Reset agenda. The title of this post by Klaus is "Now is the Time for a Great Reset." And it starts off with this bizarre photo that Klaus, I guess, thinks is clever somehow. Push to reset the world. Alrighty then. So we're going down to his 3 steps, or what he calls 3 main components of the Great Reset agenda. The first would steer the market toward fairer outcomes. And I want to point out the words he's using. First, steer. which would imply that he believes in this top-down approach because these global elites are so intellectually superior to all of us rubes in the real economy that we need them to tell us what to do. And second, he's choosing the word outcome instead of opportunity. More on that in just a moment. To this end, government should improve coordination. For example, in tax, of course, regulatory and fiscal policy. Upgrade trade arrangements and create the conditions for a quote-unquote stakeholder economy. At a time of diminishing tax bases and soaring public debt, governments have a powerful incentive to pursue such action. And I'd remind you that governments don't have any resources. They don't produce anything. The only thing they have control over is what they steal from the private sector production. Moreover, governments should implement long overdue reforms that promote more equitable outcomes. And again, he's not using the word opportunities, he's using the word outcomes. Depending on the country, these may include changes to wealth taxes, the withdrawal of fossil fuel subsidies, and new rules governing intellectual property, trade, and competition. The second component of the Great Reset agenda would ensure that investments advance shared goals such as equality and sustainability. We go right back to implying equal outcomes and not equal opportunities. The third and final priority of the Great Reset agenda is to harness the innovations of the fourth industrial revolution to support the public good. You always got to like it when bureaucrats use that terminology, especially by harnessing health and social challenges. And we'll get into the fourth industrial revolution in just a moment. Lastly, I want to point out Klaus's own quote that he uses in his post. And remember, this isn't an editor. Klaus is writing this himself. So out of all of the sentences in the article, he chooses this one in particular to quote, "The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity." He's saying that the pandemic is an opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. Let that sink in for a moment. So if that didn't make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, let's go into the pictograph that he had at the end of this post. And it's this round circle that revolves around the Great Reset agenda. And all of these things on the exterior of this circle feed into these 7 main points. And we'll get into some of those in just a moment. But these main points that go into this Great Reset start with strengthening regional development. I have no idea what that is or how you achieve that objective. And you'll notice with all of these, there are these broad stroke, overgeneralized platitudes that don't mean anything whatsoever. They have no meat and substance to them. Next is revitalizing global cooperation. Developing sustainable business models, which I always thought meant the business just had to make profit, but I guess those days are long gone. Restoring health in the environment. Okay, I kind of get that one. Redesign social contract, skills, and jobs. I have no idea what a social contract is, but it doesn't sound very enticing at all, especially if it's coming from Klaus and his friends. Shaping an economic recovery. I'm all for an economic recovery right now, but I'm not in favor of these global elites shaping it in the form that they see fit. Lastly is this fourth industrial revolution. So what is this exactly? Editor, let's go ahead and throw up a couple charts that explain it further. If you look at it, it's really just about advancing technology. We've got real-time optimization, cloud computing, cyber physical systems, additive manufacturing, I'm not sure what that is, maybe 3D printing, cobot, augmented reality, and this is where it starts to get really bizarre in my opinion, machine learning, Internet of Things, and of course, big data. What else would you expect from global elites that want to micromanage your entire life and know where you are and what you're doing at all times? I wouldn't exactly put this up there with the Industrial Revolution, electricity, the telephone, things of this nature, but this is what they're calling the fourth industrial revolution. I also wanted to point out another one of their diagrams that add a couple more things to the mix of augmented reality, big data. We've got controlled system. That does not sound good. What sounds even worse is a monitoring tool. And let's go back to this picto diagram and further examine some of these suggestions on the exterior of this circle that they think will lead into this great reset. So one of the ways we're going to supposedly harness this fourth industrial revolution is by the future of media, entertainment, and culture. Okay. Strengthening regional development. We're going to somehow achieve that through biodiversity. It's not that I'm opposed to biodiversity, it's just I don't think it will help us strengthen regional development in any way, shape, or form. And they want to revitalize global cooperation in things like international security. Basically, what that means is more invasion on your personal privacy, such as banking and FATCA regulations. And sustainable business models are somehow going to be a result of agile governance. And restoring the health of the environment is somehow going to come from something they're calling a circular economy. Redesigning social contracts, skills, and jobs will achieve that through justice and law. And I always like the word justice because who defines exactly what justice is? Is that going to be Klaus or is that going to be me and you? And finally, my favorite is shaping the economic recovery. We're going to get out of this global recession and depression by, of course, including more LGBTI people. I have no idea what I stands for. Last time I checked, it was only LGBT, but of course these things change daily. We're also going to achieve an economic recovery by gender parity and through things like taxation and inclusive design. It's amazing that such an intricate diagram with so many words can actually say so little. So this is their Great Reset agenda. And if you're saying to yourself right now, well, George, I don't really get it. It just seems like this overly vague word salad of just this drivel that doesn't mean anything. Go ahead and join the club. I am right there with you. But I don't think it's really about their agenda. I think it's about what's playing out behind the scenes and what their true intentions actually are. For more on that, let's go right to an interview, a fantastic clip that I found from Joe Rogan interviewing one of my favorites, Brett Weinstein.
Equality of outcome, it's impossible. If you pursue it, you end up with a dystopia. And even if it were possible, it would not be desirable for the reasons you point to about the benefits of what you're calling competition.
But there are people in this world that do want to push towards an equality of outcome.
Yes.
And they make it sound as if this is not just logical, but ethical and possible in the future, and that you are on the wrong side of history if you think that capitalism and competition and all these things you just talked about are good, and that really the best thing is to force people to become some sort of utopian creature that works together in unison, and everybody is egalitarian, and there's no need for feminism and men's rights activists because everybody looks at everyone as an equal.
Well, there are two kinds of people who will advocate for equality of outcome. One kind of person who will is confused. They don't understand what happens if you go down this road. And the other one is cynical, and they're using this as an excuse to justify something that just so happens to reward them.
I couldn't agree with Brett more. So are Klaus and his cronies just confused, or are they using this as an excuse to further their own hidden agenda? I'll let you be the judge. Step number 2, the economic reality of the Great Reset. And we'll go ahead and take the tinfoil hat off. We'll leave that in step number 1. Although you gotta admit, Klaus and Mr. Bigglesworth, they sure look like they could come straight out of a James Bond movie. Be that evil villain from Spectre, that's for sure. But let's look at the economic impact of what they're proposing. We'll focus on that. We want to start by understanding that people are always going to pursue their own self-interest and the interest of their family. It's not to say they won't give to charity or be altruistic, but it is to say that they're going to prioritize their own self-interest and their family. Regardless of what culture I've experienced around the world, what ethnicity, it doesn't matter. People all fall into this category. It's hardwired into our brain, and it's not going to change. Also, I'd like to point out what the great Thomas Sowell always reminds us, there are no solutions, only alternatives. Why is this? Because we're dealing with scarce resources that have alternative uses. And what I mean by this specifically is regardless of what you're doing, we always have to include a cost-benefit analysis. It's very easy to focus on the intentions of some regulation, laws, or programs and totally ignore the actual results. But all of the mumbo jumbo we heard in step number 1 really boils down to a couple things. Klaus and the cronies want to increase regulations and taxes. They're most likely also going to have this hiring quota, and everything needs to be green. So let's see how that plays out in a little simple example. We'll use Farmer Frank right here. He's got a plot of land. He's growing wheat, corn, some sort of food. And Klaus comes in and says, listen, Frank, from now on, you have to buy cyber tractors. No more of those diesel tractors you were buying from Caterpillar. So first, what this does is this allocates resources to something that was very efficient. And why do I say it was efficient? Because Frank was using it in the first place, and we know that Frank knows more about farming than Klaus and Mr. Bigglesworth ever will. So human ingenuity, materials, and capital all go into building these cyber tractors and get diverted from building something else that may have been more efficient. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on green energy. What I am saying is that it should be based on market demand. It should be a bottoms-up approach, not tops-down. If it is top-down, most likely you're going to have this misallocation of resources that are very scarce, I'd like to point out. And then we've got this hiring quota. So over here, we've got Moody the millennial. And of course, it is they, because I don't know Moody's personal pronouns, but I do know that Moody does not like work. She's giving it a thumb, or they are giving it a thumbs down because they don't want to work in this field at all. But Farmer Frank has to hire them because he needs someone in the LGBTI community. I'm not sure if Moody is an L, a G, a B, a T, or an I, but the bottom line is they fit the category that Klaus and the cronies and Mr. Bigglesworth are laying out for Farmer Frank. But the one thing we do know for sure is that Moody is going to offer a lot less productivity than someone that Frank would hire based on merit alone. So what we have in this very simple example is we have a misallocation of scarce resources. We have less economic output, which is going to lead to a lower standard of living. Why is that? Because Frank can't produce as much wheat. If Frank can't produce as much food, that means someone else in the economy is going to have to start growing food. Well, that person could have done something else, such as become a doctor, become a scientist, an engineer that maybe could have worked on something like green energy. But now they can't because they're going to have to grow wheat or they're going to have to grow their own food. And I'd also like to point out that we're seeing this play out in real life right now with the cerveza sickness. We know what it looks like when economic activity goes down by 75, 95, 85%, whatever. It's not good. It gets really ugly really fast. And we just haven't seen the worst of it because, as you know, the Fed and the government have come in with all of their stimulus packages that will most likely be temporary. And if they are permanent, it's going to lead to an even worse outcome through inflation and a loss of purchasing power. But let me be crystal clear. I'm not saying that we shouldn't strive to have greener energy. I like breathing clean air better than anybody. And I'm not saying we shouldn't try to eliminate discrimination. But what I am saying is we need to persuade individual people that can make decisions for themselves to take action that will lead to those outcomes. We shouldn't try to force people into doing something, and we definitely shouldn't regulate them into doing that either. Also, sustainable. I hear this word all the time. And to be sustainable, we need to always remember that it has to be profitable. I think in today's day and age, we've completely forgot the concept of a business needing to actually make a profit. If we have these businesses that are zombie companies that are just feeding off the government, that's always going to come at the price of future taxation or inflation and most likely a lower standard of living. But really the takeaway, it's got to be a bottoms-up type approach. You've got to convince individuals in the real economy to want to take these actions, and the entrepreneurs will satisfy those needs and wants. We can't have this tops-down approach or the results are going to be even worse than what we have today, regardless of the intentions. And one more thing I'd like to point out for those of you watching this video who favor this type of tops-down approach in certain aspects of our economy. And the argument you always hear is, well, we can't rely on the entrepreneur because they're greedy, and we have to have some sort of public official in there that's actually benevolent and virtuous that we can rely on for the greater good of society. And I could tell you why this opinion is fundamentally flawed, but nobody does it better than Milton Friedman himself.
When you see around the globe the maldistribution of wealth, the desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries, when you see so few haves and so many have-nots, when you see the greed and the concentration of power within, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy. The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you want to know where the masses are worst off, it's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by a free enterprise system.
But it seems to reward not virtue as much as ability to manipulate the system.
And what does reward virtue? You think the communist commissar rewards virtue? You think a Hitler rewards virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, do you think American presidents reward virtue? Do they choose their appointees on the basis of the virtue of the people appointed or on the basis of their political clout? Is it really true that political self-interest is nobler somehow than economic self-interest? You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us.
So do you honestly think that Klaus and his buddies at the World Economic Forum are those angels that are going to lead us to this utopian future? Do you honestly think they're less greedy than those capitalists, or they're more virtuous? The only thing we're going to get from this great reset is more cronyism, more corporatism, and a lot less personal freedom. And that's if we don't have the tinfoil hat on. If we take that tinfoil hat, put it back on, it gets real crazy once you go down that rabbit hole. That is for sure, but we'll leave that for a separate video. Step number 3. What is the end game? How does this play out for ordinary people like you and me? I think their plan is to stagflate, tax, and lie. Everything else is just smoke and mirrors. It's a total cover-up and sham. And this is a fantastic way to sum it up. Got to give all the credit to my good buddy Jason Burke with Wall Street for Main Street. If you're not checking him out, make sure you do so. So there's a few things we know. Government debt is at all-time high. This is a huge problem, especially if you're a government official and you want to keep power. The World Economic Forum is a group of these government leaders that's been meeting since the 1970s. So of course they all know each other. They're trying to help each other out. It's the cronyism I was talking about before. And they're all in bed with Klaus and his creepy crew. This isn't about climate change. It's about increasing your taxes. It's not about equality. It's about increasing regulation on everyday people like you and I. It's about micromanaging everything. These global elites think that they're so much smarter than you that you can't make decisions on your own. It's not about increasing your living standards. It's about giving them more and more power. Don't be fooled they care about any of these topics or your well-being. They care about one thing and one thing only. That is pursuing their own self-interest. We go back to this pictograph I used in step number 2 from Klaus's post, but now I've done it in a way that's far more accurate. Instead of his mumbo jumbo, we've got their real intentions. That's stagflate, tax, and lie. Let's dive into this a little deeper. We understand the details so we can connect the dots and see what's most likely coming down the pipeline for everyday people like you and I. We'll start with taxes. One way they've already increased them without you even knowing it, it's a combination of both tax and lie, leave it up to the government to pull that off, is through this 2018 bill that was passed. You think that it lowered your taxes. In short term, it might have, but long term, it's going to increase them. It's this tax bracket scam that nobody is talking about it. And I've gone over it in a few of my videos, but it's worth mentioning again. It's very important you understand how this works. Editor, go ahead and throw up the chart. What they've done is they've changed the way they measure inflation from something called the CPIU to the CCPIU. And of course, the CCPIU measures inflation at a lower rate than how it was measured before. Why is this important? Because it keeps tax brackets lower longer. So if your income is going up in nominal terms, so your purchasing power isn't increasing at all, you go to a higher and higher tax bracket. So they're stealing more and more of your income without you even knowing it. And this was baked into that 2018 tax bill that was sold to the general public as a way to lower their taxes. But of course, it's increasing your taxes long-term. Total scam. I also think they're going to increase long-term capital gains to the same level as income. They're going to increase the wealth tax, increase the exit tax, and they're definitely going to increase property taxes at a local level if you live in one of these states or cities that are totally bust. And they're going to lie the way they've always done it, through these bogus numbers with the CPI and the unemployment rate. Editor, go ahead and throw up the charts that we all know well from Shadow Stats. We look at the CPI, and if it was measured the same way today as it was back in the 1970s, the inflation rate for the last decade would be almost 10%. And unemployment, although they say it's at an all-time low, shadow stats would tell us a lot different. And I want to make sure everyone understands that shadow stats doesn't come up with their own formulas for CPI and unemployment. They just take the way the government themselves measured it back in the 70s and 80s and apply it to today. The only thing that's different is if you look at their metric that's above the government's U6 number, it includes people that haven't looked for a job for over a year. The government just pretends they don't exist, and they always have. But shadow stats, I think, accurately says, hey, these people are unemployed as well. And then it goes back to the GDP growth. Of course, we hear that this is the greatest economy ever. We've never seen anything like it because all of these statistics, like unemployment, are so fantastic. But if we actually adjusted for the correct CPI, although nominal GDP growth would be the same, real GDP growth would be flat, if not negative, going all the way back to the GFC. Now let's move on to stagflate. If you're one of these governments with this massive debt load, how do you get rid of it? You can either default or you can try to inflate it away. But they're looking at Japan and Europe and saying to themselves, well, they've had negative interest rates, they've done all this quantitative easing, and they still can't get inflation up high enough to reduce the debt load. So they're paying it back with cheaper currency units. Or the easiest way to look at it is they're not increasing their tax receipts faster than they're increasing the amount of money they're spending. In order to get the type of inflation they need to really reduce the debt burden, they know they've got to increase M2 money supply and velocity. There's a lot of things that go into inflation, but these are the two big components. So how do you do this if you're one of these governments? The first thing you can do is UBI, because you know that quantitative easing done through a central bank, the old way of doing it, the old school way back in 2008, 2009, only increases bank reserves, and that just goes into assets, doesn't necessarily increase the amount of inflation. It may or may not. So what you need to do is get cash in the back pocket of the everyday individual that's going to go out there and spend it very quickly. This increases M2 and velocity. Of course, UBI accomplishes this goal, but what you could do to take it a step further, which I definitely think they'll do, is ban cash. So you could put this app on your phone. I've talked about it many times. The Fed or the government transfers these currency units, we'll call them Fed coins, to this app. You have to go out there and spend it within a certain time frame, or else poof, it's gone off your phone. This is a way they can increase the money supply and increase the rate at which you spend the money. And those of you paying very close attention might be saying to yourself, yeah, George, I get it. They're increasing UBI, they're banning cash, they're doing these things, but that'll most likely increase the deficits even higher. How does that get rid of the debt? Insert MMT. They believe the government can spend money, or even should spend money, without issuing treasuries at all. So if you can spend money like a drunken sailor and you don't have to issue debt, your debt never goes up. It's magical how that works. And we look at the supply side of the equation. If you've got money increasing, you got velocity increasing, the last thing that you can do to really stoke inflation is reduce the amount of goods and services that are being created in the real economy. One way to do this is to deglobalize. So all those supply chains that were overseas, bring them back home. Another thing you can do is increase the unemployment rate. Usually this would be on the demand side of the equation, but if you're providing everyone with more money than they were actually making at their job to stay home and do nothing, then the demand side stays the same, if not increases, while the supply side continues to shrink because people aren't even going into work to produce these goods and services. All these businesses are going bust. And it makes one really start to ponder, how would the global elite, or how would you take this tops-down approach? How would you control it if you were Klaus, if you wanted to deglobalize and get unemployment higher? That's a hard thing to achieve. But it's exactly what we had with the cerveza sickness. So is the cerveza sickness just some random, unfortunate event that just happens to increase unemployment dramatically, most likely long term, and create this narrative, this push for deglobalization? I have no idea. But what I do know is it's extremely convenient for these global elite that are trying to push this great reset agenda, which I think is all about reducing government debt. What this means for you and me, the average Joe and Jane, is they're going to try to steal our purchasing power, the purchasing power of our children and grandchildren through taxation and inflation. They're going to try to take away the little freedom we have left, and they're going to try to seize as much power as they possibly can. Because like Milton Friedman says, they are just as greedy, if not more greedy, which is what I would argue, than these corporate CEOs, and they're definitely not benevolent, nor are they virtuous. And on that note, I had to change Klaus's quote that he used in his post to never let a good crisis go to waste. I think that is far more appropriate. And after watching this video, I think you would agree. So is this plan about climate equality and increasing the living standard for everyone in the world? Is it about reducing government debt through stagflate, tax, and lie? Or is it about something far more sinister? What are your spidey senses telling you? Let's take one last look at these global elite at the World Economic Forum who want to impose this great reset agenda on all of us. And I'll let you be the judge of their true intentions.
Now is the historical moment, the time. We need a great reset.
History would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset.
It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world.
For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here, and I will see you on the next video.